The city of glass domes rested quietly under the wide blue sky. It was morning, and warm sunlight touched the towers and streets of GalacticPrime. Captain Aaron Holt stood near a tall window, his reflection faint in the thick glass. The war was finally over. The sound of machines and soldiers running had stopped. For the first time in many years, he could hear the soft hum of the wind, and it felt strange, almost too peaceful.
Oh.
He looked down at the medals on his chest. They shone in the light, but they felt heavy. Each one was a memory of someone lost. People called him the man who ended the Great War, but he did not feel like a hero. He felt tired, hollow, and unsure of what came next. Outside, transports rose into the air, carrying soldiers back home. Huge ships floated over the golden horizon, disappearing one after another into the calm sky. Children below waved little flags and cheered, but Aaron did not smile. Peace was a word that sounded sweet, but it was built on too much pain. Aaron walked through the quiet halls of the command tower. Everywhere he went, people stopped and saluted him.
Ow!
They respected him, but his heart was heavy.
Ow!
He wanted to rest, to forget the screams and the smoke, to live as he did before the war. But how could anyone go back after seeing so much death? That night, as he sat alone in his small room, the wind carried the sound of music from the main plaza. The soldiers were celebrating the peace treaty that would be signed the next day. Aaron looked at the data pad on his desk. It showed the guest list for the ceremony. His eyes moved down the names until one stopped him cold. Queen Leora of Thalira. He read the name again. It struck him like a single note from the past. Leora. He whispered the name softly, tasting the sound as if it were something fragile. He could see flashes in his mind of a time long ago on a green world filled with orchards and rivers. He saw a girl with gray eyes and a laugh like music, chasing him down the hillside. They had been children then, both barefoot, racing between trees heavy with fruit, dreaming of exploring the stars one day. He had not thought of her in years. The galaxy had changed both of them. She had become a queen. He had become a soldier. Fate had torn their worlds apart and turned them into enemies. Now, after all this time, they would stand under the same roof again. The next morning came quiet and bright. Aaron dressed in his spotless uniform and watched the sun rise over the metal rooftops. The air was cool, but his palms were warm with nervousness. He told himself this meeting would be like any other official gathering. They would talk about peace, sign documents, smile for the cameras. It was only duty. Yet deep inside, his heart told him something else awaited him there. When the royal ship landed, the crowd outside filled the plaza. People shouted, waved banners, and took pictures as the ramp lowered slowly. Soldiers formed neat lines at the edges of the landing field. Aaron stood on the platform beside other officers. His posture was straight, perfect, the way a commander should look. But when the ramp touched the ground and she appeared, his breath caught for an instant. Queen Leora stepped forward, dressed in silver and white. The light reflected off her gown, and for a moment she looked unreal, as if a piece of the past had walked out of a dream. She moved with quiet grace, eyes steady, calm but full of thought. She looked older, stronger, but the echo of the playful girl he once knew still lived somewhere in her face. Their eyes met across the distance. The sound of cheering seemed to fade away. He became aware only of her eyes finding his. Recognition flashed there quick, uncertain, alive. Neither of them spoke, but a world of memory passed silently between them. An officer beside Aaron cleared his throat and announced the Queen's arrival. The formal greetings began. The Queen bowed her head slightly to the crowd, and the ceremony started. Aaron followed the protocol exactly, his voice firm, his face calm. No one watching would have guessed that his chest felt tight, that he was fighting the weight of 10 years of memories pressing hard against his heart. When the speeches were over, the diplomats began talking about trade and rebuilding. Aaron stood beside them, but his mind drifted to another place, to a sunlit orchard and a promise made long ago by two children who thought nothing could come between them. Now the girl from his past had returned, not as a child, but as a queen of a fallen world. The soldier who had won the war would meet her again. And deep inside, both would soon learn that peace between nations was only the beginning of the real journey that waited for them beyond the war.
Silence.
The great hall was filled with golden light from tall glass windows. Long flags hung from the walls, each one showing a story of battle and peace. People moved quietly between silver tables, dressed in fine uniforms and bright gowns. There was music, slow and calm, the kind that filled the space, but did not ask for attention. Captain Aaron Holt stood among a few other officers near the edge of the room. His expression was polite and still, the kind people wear when they must hide what they feel. The peace treaty had brought together leaders from across the worlds. Soldiers, rulers, and envoys stood, shoulder to shoulder, speaking in soft voices about rebuilding what had been lost. He had seen many battles, but nothing had prepared him for seeing her again. Queen Leora had entered the room a little earlier, and in that instant, the bright noise of the crowd faded for him. She moved gracefully down the carpet, her pale gown catching the light. People bowed as she passed, and each step seemed to carry quiet strength. There was confidence in her walk, but also something gentle in her eyes, as if she carried both pride and sorrow together. When she spoke with the human council, her voice was calm and clear. Aaron watched from his place, pretending to focus on his glass of water, but his thoughts were somewhere else. He could not stop remembering the child she once was, the laughter they had shared, and the way they used to race through the trees. Now, time had changed everything, and they stood on opposite sides of history. As her speech ended, the room filled with applause. Leora smiled softly, then her gaze moved across the crowd and found him again. For a moment, the years fell away, but it was only for a second before the crowd moved, and she turned again toward the diplomats. Hours passed as papers were signed and hands were shaken. Cameras flashed, and every smile was recorded for the history books. But when the official event ended, the guests began to leave one by one. The hall grew quieter and the music became softer. Aaron was about to walk out when one of the Queen's attendants stopped him politely. The young woman bowed slightly and said that Her Majesty wished to speak with him in private. His heart skipped. He nodded, trying to look calm, and followed her through a long corridor lit with soft white lamps. They reached a smaller room, overlooking the city. The windows were open to the cool night air. The lights from the streets below glowed like 1,000 tiny stars. Leora stood near the window, her crown now placed aside on a table. She looked different without it, younger somehow, though her face still held the calm of a ruler. When Aaron entered, she turned to him, and for a moment neither spoke. "It has been a long time," Leora said quietly. "Yes," he answered. His voice almost caught, but he cleared his throat. "A lifetime, it feels like." She smiled faintly. "I was not sure if you would remember me. How could I forget?" he said. "I only wished the first time we met again would be under kinder stars." She walked closer, her eyes studying his face. "War changes everyone," she said. "But I see something still the same. The way you stand, the way you look at the sky as if you still want to know what lies beyond it." Aaron felt a small warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. "And I see the same girl who once beat me in every race through the orchard," he said. She laughed softly then, the sound light and real. For the first time since the war began, he remembered what peace could feel like. They spoke for hours. They talked about the war, what it had done to their people, how many lives had been lost. They spoke of families divided, of cities ruined, and of the long road to rebuilding. But at times their talk slipped back to memories, two small stories of laughter and sunlight from their childhood. Each story opened another door to the past, and behind each door was a piece of who they once were. When silence came between them, it was not heavy, it was gentle, like the quiet that comes after rain. Leora looked at the city below. "There is so much to fix," she said. "We must learn how to make peace work. I do not want our people to live in fear again." Aaron nodded. "You have my word that I will do everything I can to keep the peace." "I know," she said softly. "That is why I asked for you tonight. I wanted to see if the boy I once knew was still here. Now I know he is." The clock on the wall chimed softly. She turned back toward the window. The light from the city reflected in her eyes, a mix of silver and gold. Aaron stood for a while longer, unsure what else to say. Then he gave a small bow. "Your Majesty," he said quietly. She smiled again, and it reached her eyes this time. "Good night, Captain. Tomorrow a new world begins for both of us." He turned and walked out, his steps slow and thoughtful. Outside, the night wind brushed across his face. He looked up at the stars and for the first time felt something that almost resembled hope. The night air on GalacticPrime was cool and smelled faintly of metal and rain. Captain Aaron Holt could not sleep. He had returned to his quarters after meeting Queen Leora, but his thoughts refused to rest. He sat by the window, looking out at the quiet city that glowed beneath the stars. The towers shone like frozen sunlight, reflections of the future they were trying to build. He thought of the Queen's words, her voice steady but warm. She had changed so much since the days of their childhood. Yet there was still something gentle in her eyes that had not been touched by time or war. It reminded him of who he was before the fighting began, before duty had turned him into a different man. The next morning came soft and gray. A message arrived for him just before sunrise. It was short and simple, signed only with her name. She asked to meet him in the old hangar near the base, the one that had been damaged near the end of the war. His heart beat faster as he read it. The meeting was not part of the official agenda. It was something private, something real. He walked through the quiet corridors, past resting soldiers and empty rooms. The hangar stood far from the main city. The large steel doors were open, and sunlight streamed through the broken roof. Inside, Queen Leora was already there, dressed plainly, without her crown or guards. She turned when she heard his steps. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would," he replied with a small smile. For a moment, there was silence between them. Dust danced in the shafts of light, and a small breeze carried the faint smell of engine oil. The hangar had once been the heart of battle. Now it was peaceful, like an old soldier finally allowed to rest. Leora walked closer, her hands clasped together. "This place is where the war ended," she said. "I wanted to see it with my own eyes. They told me this is where you gave the order that saved your people." Aaron gave a small nod. "Yes, but many who stood with me that day never saw the peace they fought for." She looked at him with quiet sympathy. "It is the same on my side. So many gone. And for what? Land, pride, power. We both lost too much." He sighed and leaned against one of the old control panels. "When I was younger, I believed war could make things right. I thought protecting our people meant destroying the enemy. But now I see no one truly wins." Leora's voice softened. "I was told from childhood that victory was honor, that we were strong and meant to rule. I obeyed without question until one day I saw the cost. My crown felt heavier every year." For a long time they stood in silence. The sunlight reached across the floor and touched their faces. Aaron looked at her, really looked at her, not as a queen but as Leora, the girl who once ran barefoot through the grass beside him. He smiled faintly. "Remember the apple orchard back on Thalira?" he said. "You used to climb the tallest tree and drop apples on my head." She laughed then, the sound clear in the wide, empty hangar. "You were slow," she said, still smiling. "I always told you so." That laughter brought warmth to the cold metal room. For a little while it felt like they were children again, untouched by duty or fear. But when the laughter faded, the air grew quiet once more. Leora looked out the window toward the city skyline. "Do you think peace will last?" she asked. Aaron followed her gaze. "It has to," he said. "People have had enough of war. They need something better to believe in." She turned to face him again. "Then let us show them. You and I, if old enemies can stand together, maybe others will learn to do the same." He nodded slowly. "Together," he said. The word felt right, simple and strong. They walked around the hangar, talking about what would come next. She spoke of new schools, new farms, rebuilding the damaged lands. He spoke of returning soldiers, how to give them hope and work again. Each idea grew into another until a clear vision of tomorrow began to form between them. Outside, the wind rose and pushed through the open doors. The sound of it carried through the hangar like a whisper of the future. For the first time in many years, Aaron felt light in his chest. He saw in her a partner, someone who understood the same pain, someone who believed in the same dream. When the sun moved higher, she turned to leave. "We will speak again soon," she said, her tone firm now, more like a queen but with kindness in her eyes. Aaron bowed slightly. "I will be ready." She paused at the doorway and looked back. "You still owe me one race," she said, with a small smile before walking into the sunlight, listening to the quiet hum of the morning. The hangar that once smelled of fire now felt like peace. The light touched the steel walls and made them gleam. Something inside him shifted, gentle and sure. The war was over. But in that silent place, Aaron Holt began to understand that peace was not just an end. It was a beginning. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the start of finding himself again through the girl who had become a queen. The months that followed were filled with work and quiet hope. The sound of construction replaced the sound of guns. In every city, people rebuilt roads, homes, and gardens where fire once reigned. For the first time in years, children laughed in the streets, and lights stayed on through the night without fear of attack. Captain Aaron Holt had been given a new command. He now led the Horizon, a large ship built as a symbol of peace between the two sides. It was not a warship, but a vessel made for travel, trade, and protection. Beside him, Queen Leora worked as both a leader and an envoy, guiding the talks between old enemies. When they stood together at public meetings, people whispered with pride. They saw two souls who had once fought against each other, now walking side by side. Aaron spent long days training new officers who had never seen war. He taught them to lead with care, not power. At night, when the ship was quiet, he often found himself looking at the stars through the viewing glass. He liked to think each star held a story of someone who believed again in peace. Leora visited the Horizon often. She carried her duties with grace. But when the heavy work ended, she would stand beside Aaron at the observation deck. They would talk about simple things. She liked to speak of how flowers now grew again in the fields of her home. He liked to talk about how the seas were clean and blue again on Earth. Those talks gave both of them strength. But peace was fragile, and not everyone welcomed it. Some people in both nations hated the treaty. They blamed the other side for all the losses. A small group of former officers and traders began gathering in secret, angry at how fast old enemies had become friends. They wanted power again, and they would do anything to take it. One cold night, as the Horizon floated near the border of the two worlds, a small messenger ship was spotted, sent no signals, and moved faster than any trade ship should. The bridge alarm blared, pulling Aaron out of his chair. "Unknown craft," the sensor officer said. "No identification code." Aaron's calm voice carried through the air. "Hold fire. Try to hail them first." There was no answer. The small craft drew closer. Leora stepped onto the bridge, dressed in a dark travel cloak. She had come earlier for the inspection, but now her face showed worry. "What's happening?" Aaron turned toward her. A ship without identification. Could be smugglers or worse. He ordered a second hail. This time a short message came through a cold voice saying only, "Peace built on lies will burn." Before anyone could react, the small craft launched a bright flash that lit up the Horizon. The defense systems moved fast, blocking most of it, but the shock shook the ship. The Horizon trembled. Sparks flew from the ceiling, and lights flickered. People shouted instructions. Aaron barked orders with sharp control, moving through smoke and noise. Within minutes, the danger passed. The attacker fled, and security went after them. No one was seriously hurt, but the bridge smelled of smoke and fear. Leora looked around, her voice firm but calm. "There will always be those who do not want peace," she said. "They live in the past." Aaron met her eyes. "Then we must show them the future is stronger." Later, when repairs began, Aaron and Leora stood on the outer deck, watching crews replace broken panels. The stars shone above like silent witnesses. "It reminded me of the war," Aaron said quietly. "Me too," she admitted. "But this time we will not answer with more war. We'll answer with unity." He looked at her, the wind of space brushing across their faces like the breath of another world. "You really believe people can change, don't you?" "I do," she said, "because I changed. And you changed too." Her words stayed with him long after she left that night. The Horizon continued its mission, visiting spaceports, bringing medicine, and helping rebuild lost colonies. Everywhere they went, more people began to trust the peace. Still, a shadow lingered in the quiet. Rumors spread of groups working against the treaty. Some said they planned another strike. Leora faced every new problem with calm resolve. speaking to her people through clear and kind words that reached their hearts. Aaron admired her for that. He saw the girl he once knew, but also the queen. She had become strong, wise, and driven by hope. Weeks later, a great celebration was planned in the capital to mark 1 year of peace. The Horizon would lead the fleet into the city's skies. Aaron watched from the deck as the world below glowed with light again. He thought of the past battles, the lost friends, and how far they had come. He thought of Leora's smile, the light in her eyes when she spoke of the future. This time, victory was not found in battle. It was found in building something worth protecting, and for Aaron Holt that meant standing beside the Queen, who had shown him that even after endless war, the heart still knew how to heal. The evening sky above NetNarrator was painted with gold and silver as 2 suns began to set. The capital city glowed softly, its tall towers shining like glass pillars. Music drifted through the air, light and full of joy. People filled the streets, celebrating the first year of peace after the long war. Flags waved from every balcony, and laughter echoed across the plazas. Captain Aaron Holt stood on the balcony of the Horizon, the great ship now resting above the city. From there, he could see the whole world below, bright lights, calm seas, and smoke from fireworks rising like stars. His uniform was spotless, but his hands still bore the faint scars from the battles of old. Each mark reminded him of what it had taken to reach this day. Behind him, the soft sound of footsteps made him turn. Queen Leora entered, wearing a simple gown of pale blue. The crown on her head caught the fading light, but her smile was warm and human. She looked not like a ruler tonight, but like a person among her people. Aaron bowed slightly. Your Majesty, the city looks alive again. She smiled. It finally does. For a whole year, no one has heard the sound of guns. It's only songs and building tools. She stepped beside him and looked down at the glowing streets. It feels almost like a dream. He nodded. A hard-earned dream. One that we can never let fade. They watched the fireworks burst across the sky. Red, green, and gold lights painted reflections on the glass towers. Below, children ran through the streets, waving small flags and shouting with laughter. The world was alive again, and for once, it did not fear tomorrow. Hey! After a quiet moment, Leora said, "Do you remember the orchard where we used to race?" Aaron turned toward her, a slow smile forming. How could I forget? You always reached the last tree before me. That's because I never looked back, she said softly. You always did. He chuckled. Suppose I was afraid you might fall. Leora laughed, a sound that carried gentle warmth. Maybe that is why you became a soldier. You never stop looking back to make sure others are safe. The laughter faded into silence, but it was a peaceful silence this time. The kind that came when words were no longer needed. Then came a distant sound from the city. Single ship rose into the sky, trailing a long silver banner. The crowd below cheered as the Horizon's engines rumbled, joining the fleet in a circle over the capital. It was the formal end to the celebration, a promise to protect peace together. Aaron guided the ship with careful pride, standing beside Leora at the command deck. As they looked out at the other ships gliding through the amber sky, he spoke quietly. When the war ended, I thought my purpose was over. I did not know what peace would ask of me. She looked at him, and now you do. He thought for a long moment before answering. Yes, peace needs the same courage as war, but different hands to hold it. Building takes more strength than fighting. Leora's eyes softened, and perhaps we are both still soldiers, but this time for hope. The Horizon moved smoothly above the city, casting a wide shadow over houses and fields below. Every light they passed seemed to shine brighter. The people waved and some shouted their names. They were no longer symbols of fear or loss. To everyone watching, they stood as a promise, a sign that unity was real. That night, after the ceremonies ended, the Queen walked with Aaron through the palace garden. The air smelled of night blooms and rain. The path curved between tall trees heavy with fruit. It reminded both of them of the orchard long ago. Leora reached out and touched one of the branches. When I was small, I thought trees grew back overnight, she said with a soft smile. But peace grows slower than that, doesn't it? Yes, he said. But it lasts longer. She looked up at him. And if others forget, will you remind them? I will, he said. Always. They walked in silence again, their steps folding into the rhythm of the night. The moon rose above the garden, bright and full, casting silver light through the leaves. When they reached the end of the path, Leora turned toward him. "Aaron, I never thanked you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For keeping your promise," she said, smiling faintly. "You said once that you would find peace someday. I think you did." He looked into her eyes and felt the weight of every battle fall away. "No," he said softly. "We found it together." She nodded, her face calm and bright in the moonlight. For a moment they stood there in silence as the wind moved gently through the trees. Far above the horizon floated quietly in orbit, its lights like stars against the dark sky. The war that had once divided their worlds was now only a memory told in stories and songs. Down in the garden, the queen and the soldier stood side by side, no longer bound by crown or uniform, but by something far stronger. The night around them was peaceful, full of promise. And somewhere in their hearts, the same thoughts stirred, quiet knowing that this was not an ending, but the beginning of a new story, one written not in war or sorrow, but in the steady light of a hope that would never fade.